When the elderly veteran was thrown off the plane for being kind, she had no idea that the Army general had already been informed of what had happened. What happened next left the entire airport silent. Henrietta Macmillan, a name that carried the quiet gravitas of a life well lived, sat in the bustling concourse of Sunrise Field Regional Airport in Delphos, Indiana. Her 73 years had etched lines of wisdom around her clear, perceptive eyes, eyes that had seen more than most could imagine. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, now shimmered with the soft glow of dawn. In her hands, a well-worn paperback depicting a vintage bomber on its cover, a silent nod to her past in the United States Air Force. She was en route to Phoenix, Arizona, a long-anticipated visit with a dear friend she hadn't embraced in over a decade. The low hum of distant jet engines, the rhythmic clatter of rolling luggage, and the kaleidoscopic blur of hurried travelers created a symphony of modern transit, yet Henrietta found a peculiar tranquility amidst the chaos. She always arrived early, a habit forged in decades of disciplined living, preferring the calm anticipation to the frenzied rush. Her left leg, a loyal but sometimes nagging companion since a difficult training landing in the 1970s, offered only a faint ache today, a subtle promise of rain that she chose to ignore. Beneath her sensible tweed jacket, a small silver-winged brooch lay nestled, a discreet emblem of her service, worn more for personal reflection than public display. Her flight, Pacific Airlines Flight 712, was scheduled for departure in an hour. Henrietta sipped from her water bottle, her thoughts drifting to Marilyn, her friend in Arizona. She envisioned their reunion, the shared laughter over faded photographs, the comfortable silence of old friends simply existing together. It was a simple pleasure, one she cherished. But the quietude of her moment was abruptly shattered by a sharp, escalating argument near the Pacific Airlines check-in counter. Henrietta's gaze lifted, drawn by the raised voices. A young man, his name badge proclaiming him Tyler O'Connell, stood rigidly behind the counter, facing an elderly woman whose distress was palpable. Her silver hair, hastily gathered into a loose bun, seemed to vibrate with her agitated gestures as she desperately tried to explain something, her words a frantic, unheard plea against Tyler's impassive demeanor. He exuded an air of bored indifference, punctuated by flashes of overt annoyance. "Ma'am, I have already informed you. Your carry-on luggage exceeds the specified dimensions," Tyler's voice boomed, cutting through the general airport murmur and drawing curious glances from nearby passengers. "You will either pay the additional fee or you will leave the item here. Those are your only options." The elderly woman, whose name Henrietta would soon learn was Maisie Peters, looked utterly defeated. The bag, while indeed a carry-on, appeared to Henrietta's seasoned eye to be only marginally larger than standard. "But this is a gift from my grandson. He lives in San Diego. I simply cannot abandon it," Maisie cried, her voice trembling on the verge of tears. "I've flown with this very bag countless times before. Never once has it been an issue." Tyler offered a condescending smirk, his eyes briefly sweeping over the offending bag. "Regulations have evolved, ma'am. Perhaps you're not keeping abreast of current news? Every single ounce is accounted for now, a matter of principle." His tone dripped with patronizing superiority, a calculated dismissal of her distress. Henrietta felt a slow, simmering irritation begin to churn within her. She watched, her jaw subtly clenching, as Maisie's trembling hands fumbled inside her purse, struggling to extract a credit card. It was clear, even from Henrietta's vantage point, that Maisie was not a woman of means. The sight ignited a familiar spark of resolve within Henrietta. Without a moment's hesitation, she pushed herself up from her seat, her movements deliberate, her bearing radiating a quiet strength that belied her years. She moved towards the unfolding scene, her footsteps measured and firm. "Young man, might there be some room for compromise here?" Henrietta's voice, though soft, possessed an underlying steeliness, a timbre instantly recognizable to anyone who had served in uniform. "The lady is clearly distressed, and that bag hardly looks to be an excessive burden." She spoke with a calm authority, a lifetime of navigating complex situations distilled into a few measured words. Tyler turned slowly, his brow furrowed in annoyance, his gaze sweeping over Henrietta's composed features, then snagging on the subtle gleam of her winged brooch. A faint, dismissive sneer touched his lips. "Ma'am, I am merely executing my duties as dictated by company policy. Your intervention in airline procedures is, quite frankly, not relevant. If you do not intend to check a bag, I must insist you step away from the counter." His words were delivered with a biting sharpness, almost a deliberate attempt to humiliate. Maisie Peters flinched, shrinking into herself as if expecting a physical blow. Henrietta, however, remained perfectly still, her composure unshaken. "I was merely attempting to offer assistance," she stated, her gaze unwavering, direct. "A touch of empathy, I believe, would not be amiss in this situation." Tyler let out a derisive snort. "Empathy, ma'am, does not cover the cost of jet fuel." "Next." He swiveled his body, turning his back on both women with an air of theatrical dismissal, his attention now fixed on his computer screen, a clear signal of his unwillingness to engage further. A wave of profound disappointment washed over Henrietta. She genuinely felt for Maisie, a stranger caught in the cold, unyielding machinery of corporate policy. "How much do you owe, dear?" she asked Maisie, her voice gentle, a stark contrast to Tyler's harshness. Maisie's tear-filled eyes lifted to Henrietta's, brimming with a mixture of shame and gratitude. $50, but I only have 30 with me." Her voice trailed off, a whisper of defeat. Without a flicker of hesitation, Henrietta reached into her wallet, her fingers deftly extracting 2 crisp $20 bills. "Here, please take this," she said, extending the money towards Maisie. "Consider it a small gift for your grandson. We veterans, you see, we tend to look out for one another. I imagine we have quite a bit in common. Wouldn't you agree?" A subtle wink accompanied her words, a gesture of shared understanding that brought a faint, watery smile to Maisie's lips. Tyler O'Connell, who had seemed utterly absorbed in his computer, suddenly whipped around. His eyes narrowed to slits as he witnessed the exchange of money. "What is the meaning of this? Unauthorized financial transactions are strictly prohibited within airport premises," he bellowed, his voice laced with manufactured outrage. Henrietta's eyebrows arched in genuine surprise. "I merely assisted a lady with an overweight baggage fee. What precisely is the problem, young man?" Her voice remained steady, her dignity unassailable. "The problem, ma'am, is that you are interfering with official airline business and violating regulations." Tyler's voice rose, edged with an almost hysterical fervor. He was practically shouting, his face flushed with indignation. "I am fully within my rights to summon airport security." Several individuals in the queue behind Maisie began to murmur amongst themselves, their whispers a growing tide of nervous curiosity. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Henrietta, despite the rising tide of indignation within her, maintained her composure. She understood that losing her temper would only play into his hands. "I see no violation here. I simply offered assistance to a passenger in distress." Henrietta responded calmly, her gaze unwavering, meeting his furious stare with an unflappable serenity. "You have no authority to do that." Tyler jabbed a finger in Henrietta's direction, his face contorted in a sneer of triumph. "This is not a charitable organization. There are rules here, ma'am, and you have just flagrantly disregarded them." Maisie Peters, witnessing her benefactor's predicament, began to tremble anew. "Oh, please, I didn't mean for this to happen." "Do not apologize, Maisie." Henrietta interjected, her voice firm, imbued with quiet reassurance. Neither of us has done anything wrong. Tyler O'Connell, clearly relishing his perceived victory in publicly shaming an elderly woman, allowed a smug grin to spread across his face. Very well, ma'am. Due to your blatant disregard for regulations and your blatant attempt to set an unwelcome precedent for other passengers, I am compelled to report this incident to your flight crew. I have made a notation on your reservation, and you may be denied boarding. A sharp pang shot through Henrietta's chest, a sudden chilling realization of the extent of his maliciousness, but she refused to let it show on her face. You wouldn't dare, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, yet infused with an unspoken challenge. I would, and I have just done so, Tyler declared, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Flight 712, correct? Prepare yourself for a rather unpleasant discussion at the boarding gate. He typed furiously on his computer for a few moments, then turned his back on both women once more, a picture of haughty dismissal. Maisie Peters looked utterly devastated, her shoulders slumped in despair. Oh God, Henrietta, I am so truly sorry. Now you are in trouble because of me. Henrietta Macmillan gently placed a comforting hand on Maisie's shoulder. Do not concern yourself, dear. We will navigate this. I absolutely refuse to allow such behavior to go unchallenged. However, as she made her way towards the security checkpoint, a profound sense of unease settled in her stomach. Her internal compass, usually a steadfast guide pointing towards fairness and integrity, spun wildly, disoriented. Never before had she encountered such overt contempt from airline staff. Henrietta was prepared to defend her actions, to stand her ground, but she also understood that it would not be an easy battle. She moved through the security line with practiced efficiency, her movement slightly slower than in her youth, but still purposeful. The sterile, impersonal atmosphere of the airport seemed to press in on her, a stark reminder of a world where genuine human connection and basic decency often seemed to be sacrificed at the altar of rigid protocol. Having navigated the security checks, she retrieved her small backpack and the well-loved book from the bin. As she walked towards Gate B-17, the designated boarding area for her flight, her mind replayed Tyler's sneering words, his self-satisfied smirk. Henrietta had always held that a uniform, any uniform, imposed a certain obligation of civility and professionalism. This young man, however, appeared to revel in his abandonment of such principles. Upon reaching the gate, Henrietta observed that boarding had not yet commenced. A scattering of passengers stood near the entrance to the jet bridge, patiently awaiting the announcement. Behind the counter, a young flight attendant, her bright makeup striking against her tautly pulled ponytail, meticulously checked documents. Her name tag identified her as Brianna Whitney. Henrietta approached the counter, her voice calm and even. Excuse me, I am Henrietta Macmillan on Flight 7112. I believe you may have some information regarding my reservation. Brianna's gaze, cool and devoid of warmth, lifted to meet Henrietta's. She quickly scrolled through information on her tablet, her fingers tapping impatiently. Ah, yes, Mrs. Macmillan. I have just been informed of your incident at the check-in counter. Her tone was clipped, her expression one of barely concealed irritation, as if Henrietta was a tedious imposition on her morning. Henrietta folded her arms across her chest. Indeed. And what exactly were you informed? Brianna sighed dramatically, as though Henrietta's very presence was an unbearable burden. We were advised that you attempted to conduct unauthorized financial transactions within the airport premises, interfered with our personnel's duties, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Henrietta's jaw dropped slightly. Aggression? The sheer audacity of the lie took her breath away. Aggression? I I merely assisted an elderly woman in paying an overweight baggage fee, while your colleague behaved in a frankly rude and callous manner. There were no illegal transactions whatsoever. I simply offered her some money as a gesture of kindness." Brianna shook her head, her expression hardening, her voice devoid of any compassion. "Mrs. McMillan, regardless of your intentions, you have violated airline policy. We cannot permit passengers to interfere with our established procedures, particularly those involving financial transactions. It sets an unacceptable precedent." "But it was merely an act of human kindness," Henrietta exclaimed, her patience finally beginning to fray, a tremor entering her voice. "I am a veteran. I have always strived to assist others. Is that now considered a violation?" Brianna offered a dismissive shrug, her indifference chilling. "Your veteran status does not grant you license to disregard regulations, Mrs. McMillan. Management has determined that, due to this incident and your inappropriate conduct, we are unable to permit you to board this flight. Your reservation has been canceled." Henrietta felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Canceled? It was unfathomable. "Canceled? Are you being serious?" "But I have a ticket. I am flying to visit a friend. I have an important engagement." "I am sorry," Brianna stated, her voice dry, utterly devoid of genuine regret. "The decision is final. You will not be flying with us today." Henrietta McMillan stood rooted to the spot, stunned into silence. She, a woman who had dedicated years of her life to serving her country, who had witnessed and endured so much, now found herself stranded in an airport, humiliated and powerless. She looked at Brianna's cold, impassive face. Then her gaze flickered to Tyler, who stood smirking by the check-in counter, openly reveling in her distress. Other passengers had begun to gather, some watching with open curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment, utterly ignorant of the true nature of the situation. "You cannot do this," Henrietta managed to say, struggling to keep her voice level, but the tremor was undeniable now. "This is fundamentally unjust. I have done nothing to warrant being removed from this flight." Brianna merely pointed to a small laminated sign affixed to the counter. "All regulations are outlined here, Mrs. McMillan. We reserve the right to refuse carriage to any passenger whose conduct poses a threat to safety or order on board, or who violates established rules." "But I threatened no one. I simply gave a small sum of money to an elderly woman." "That is considered an unauthorized financial transaction, not sanctioned by the airline," Brianna repeated, like a parrot reciting a learned phrase. "We cannot compromise on such matters. You will not be flying today." A wave of profound disappointment, laced with a potent surge of anger, washed over Henrietta. She was being publicly humiliated, exposed to the curious and judgmental stares of strangers, individuals who understood nothing of her character or her past. She knew with chilling certainty that arguing further with Brianna was futile. This impenetrable wall of bureaucracy and indifference was insurmountable. Henrietta took a deep, steadying breath, willing herself to remain composed. Despite the growing ache in her heart, the sting of profound injustice, Henrietta refused to descend to their level. She turned, her back ramrod straight, and walked slowly towards the exit from the gate area, her dignity intact, despite the crushing weight that pressed down on her shoulders. Each step echoed not only in her aging leg, but in the very core of her soul. She felt not merely humiliated, but misunderstood, discarded by a society she had once so faithfully served. It was a bitter, stinging realization. "You won't believe who stood by her side. This is just the beginning. It gets stronger." Henrietta walked away from gate B-17, the sterile fluorescence of the airport terminal seeming to press in on her, amplifying her sense of profound isolation. Her usual serene demeanor had been replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a disquieting realization that kindness, in this modern labyrinth of rules and regulations, could be weaponized against you. She had been dismissed, unceremoniously ejected from her flight, simply for daring to be compassionate. The sheer absurdity of it was almost comical, if it weren't so deeply, painfully humiliating. She passed the tantalizing aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting from Jax's Beans Cafe, but the thought of stopping, of lingering in this suffocating atmosphere, was utterly repulsive. Her sole objective was to escape the airport, where every passing glance felt like an accusation, every disembodied announcement a mocking echo of her unjust dismissal. People swirled around her, a relentless current of hurried individuals, each engrossed in their own frantic schedules, their faces obscured by the urgency of their personal journeys. No one spared a second glance for the older woman, her posture unwavering, yet with an unbearable loneliness etched in her clear eyes. To them, she was simply another passenger, perhaps one who had erred, a momentary blip in the ceaseless rhythm of travel. This crushing anonymity, this pervasive indifference of society, stung with a unique venom, a pain that resonated as deeply as the overt rudeness of Tyler and Brianna. Yet Henrietta refused to shatter. Decades of military service had forged within her an unyielding resilience, an innate capacity to absorb blows and endure. She made her way to the baggage claim, a familiar purgatory of waiting and anticipation, where she retrieved her single suitcase, mercifully not too heavy. As she stood by the carousel, her gaze fell upon a cluster of young people, their laughter boisterous, their faces aglow with the light of their smartphones as they recorded themselves. They exuded a vibrant, carefree energy that felt like a stark, almost cruel contrast to Henrietta's quiet despair. This generational chasm, this undeniable juxtaposition of youthful exuberance and seasoned weariness, only intensified her internal ache. With her suitcase in hand, Henrietta walked towards the automatic glass doors leading to the taxi stand. The cool, crisp air outside was a welcome balm, a refreshing exhale after the suffocating oppressiveness of the airport. She drew a deep, cleansing breath, attempting to purge her lungs and her mind of the lingering bitterness. She pulled out her phone, her fingers, though slightly arthritic, dialing with purpose. She needed to call Marilyn, to explain the inexplicable. "Hello, Marilyn," Henrietta began, her voice tinged with a weariness she couldn't entirely conceal. "It's Henrietta. Look, I don't think I'm going to make it to Phoenix today." She recounted the incident, her words carefully chosen, deliberately understated, to spare Marilyn the full force of her distress. "Yes, just a ridiculous misunderstanding. I'll try to get a flight for tomorrow, if there are any seats available. Or maybe another airline." Marilyn, sensing the unspoken pain in Henrietta's voice, immediately pierced through her polite veneer. "Henrietta, are you truly all right? You sound as though you've been terribly upset. What genuinely transpired?" Henrietta found she couldn't lie to her oldest friend. "Just a terribly unpleasant incident, Marilyn. They removed me from my flight for helping another elderly woman pay an overweight baggage fee. They called it an unauthorized financial transaction." A faint, ironic chuckle escaped her lips. "Can you believe it? Me, a veteran, practically a criminal, all for $50. A sharp gasp echoed from the other end of the line. "That is absolutely outrageous. Who did this to you? You simply must file a formal complaint. This is beyond belief." "I will consider it," Henrietta replied, though in her heart she knew the futility of such an endeavor. Filing a complaint would be a protracted, soul-crushing process, likely yielding no substantive outcome. The system, she understood, was designed to protect itself, not the vulnerable. For now, I simply wish to escape this place. She hailed a taxi, settling into the back seat and providing the address of the nearest motel. She needed respite, a quiet space to process the day's jarring events. As the taxi wound its way along Prospect Avenue, Henrietta gazed out the window, watching the blur of buildings and billboards. Her mind drifted back to her days in uniform, to the unwavering principles of honor and dignity that had always guided her. She observed the subtle shifts in society, the unsettling erosion of respect for elders, for experience, for those who had sacrificed their youth for the promise of a better future. It was a profoundly bitter realization. At the Route 66 Motor Inn, a modest establishment nestled on the outskirts of the city, she secured a room. It was clean, functional, devoid of any frills. Henrietta dropped her suitcase onto the bed, then sank heavily into the worn armchair, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. The unfamiliar sensation of vulnerability clung to her. She was accustomed to being strong, fiercely independent, capable of facing down any challenge. But this was a different kind of adversary, a faceless bureaucratic leviathan that seemed utterly blind to merit, deaf to kindness. She pulled out her well-loved book on World War II, attempting to lose herself in its pages, but the words blurred before her eyes. Her thoughts inexorably returned to Tyler and Brianna, to their cold, indifferent faces. She imagined them, perhaps at this very moment, laughing about her, reveling in their perceived impunity. The thought ignited a slow, burning fuse of anger within her. "No," Henrietta whispered aloud, her voice firm, resolute. "I will not permit them to simply get away with this." But what could she possibly do? She was merely one elderly woman against the monolithic power of a major airline corporation. She possessed no influential connections, no vast sums of money for high-priced legal battles. She was a simple veteran, living on a modest pension, a quiet ghost in a world that often forgot its past. Suddenly, her gaze fell upon her old military uniform, carefully folded within her suitcase. She rarely wore it, reserving it for special occasions, Veterans Day parades, a rare reunion with old comrades. But now, as she looked at the impeccably pressed fabric, a surge of power, a profound sense of self, coursed through her. This uniform was not merely cloth, it was a potent symbol of everything she had fought for: honor, duty, justice. And she was not about to retreat. Something shifted within her. Her eyes, which had held a shadow of despair, now blazed with a fierce, unwavering resolve. Henrietta rose from the armchair, her movements infused with a renewed vigor. She would not sit idly by. She would not allow herself to be humiliated and discarded so easily. She did not yet know the precise course of action she would take, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would not surrender. She reached into her wallet, extracting a crisp business card, a relic from a recent reunion. It belonged to an old comrade, a retired Colonel Jacob "Jake" Thornton. Jake was a man cut from the same cloth as Henrietta, a kindred spirit forged in the fires of service. He had always told her, his voice a low rumble of unwavering loyalty. "Henrietta, if you ever find yourself in a bind you can't untangle, you call me. We military folk, we don't abandon our own." Henrietta, fiercely independent, had always been loath to impose on others, especially for what she might have once considered minor inconveniences. But this, she now understood with crystalline clarity, was far from minor. This was a matter of principle, a direct assault on dignity itself. She dialed Jake's number, her fingers steady. "Thornton," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled through the phone, tinged with a faint, characteristic gruffness. "Jake, It's Henrietta McMillan. I apologize for disturbing you, but I find myself in need of your assistance, she stated, her voice calm, yet underscored with a tremor of quiet indignation. Henrietta recounted the entire humiliating ordeal, from the initial encounter with Tyler at the check-in counter to Brianna's cold, absolute dismissal at the gate. She spared no detail, allowing the full weight of the injustice to unfold. Jake listened in silence, his heavy breathing the only sound on the other end, a clear indicator of his escalating fury. Wait a minute. They removed you from a flight for helping another elderly woman? Jake's voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, dangerous growl. That is utterly beyond the pale. What in God's name do they think they're doing over there? That's an airport, not a damn internment camp. Precisely, Henrietta affirmed, a wave of profound relief washing over her that he understood. I feel truly awful, Jake. Not merely for myself, but for every elderly person who can be so casually humiliated and discarded. Tell me immediately which airport you're at, Henrietta, Jake commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. I will ascertain the full truth of this matter without delay. This will not stand unchallenged. Give me the airport name, the flight number, and the names of these employees, if you remember them. Henrietta recited the details. Sunrise Field in Delphos, Pacific Airlines Flight 7112, Tyler O'Connell and Brianna Whitney. A profound sense of liberation, a loosening of the tight knot in her chest, accompanied the words. At last, someone was truly on her side. All right, Henrietta, remain accessible. I will call you back as soon as I have something concrete, Jake stated, his voice laced with an undeniable edge of righteous anger. They are going to deeply regret tangling with a veteran, especially a United States Air Force veteran. Henrietta slowly lowered the phone, a fragile but definite surge of hope blooming within her. She knew Jake Thornton to be a man of his word, a man who, once committed, never wavered. If he made a promise, he delivered. He was that rare breed of individual who stood unyieldingly by his principles, come what may. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Perhaps, just perhaps, justice had not entirely abandoned this world. What's about to happen? No one saw it coming, but it's precisely what will restore justice. The pre-dawn light filtering through the thin motel curtains brought with it a fragile sense of renewed purpose for Henrietta McMillan. Despite the restless night, her spirit felt remarkably fortified. Jake Thornton's phone call had not merely offered hope, it had ignited a quiet, unwavering conviction that her humiliation would not go unanswered. She rose early, a practiced habit from decades of military routine, and brewed a cup of the motel's rather insipid coffee from the in-room machine. She checked her phone. No message from Jake yet, but she harbored no doubt that he was already in motion, a force of nature once roused. Henrietta knew him to be a man of swift, decisive action, utterly incapable of procrastination. After a bracing shower, she dressed in her finest, albeit understated attire, and meticulously reviewed the map of Delphos she'd picked up from the motel lobby. Her destination, the airport. Not to beg for a seat on a rescheduled flight, but to bear witness, to observe the unfolding consequences of their egregious behavior. She felt an almost magnetic pull back to the scene of her indignity, a deep-seated intuition that her presence, even as a silent observer, would somehow anchor the scales of justice. It was a day, she sensed, when the natural order of things would finally reassert itself. Upon arriving at the airport via the same taxi, Henrietta made directly for the Pacific Airlines check-in area. It was important, crucial even, for her to see Tyler O'Connell again. She wanted to meet his gaze, to discern if even a flicker of remorse, a shadow of regret, haunted his eyes for his actions. As she approached the counter, Tyler was indeed there, his shift having evidently begun early. He sat slumped slightly, his demeanor one of practiced indifference, processing the sparse stream of morning passengers. Nearby, Brianna Whitney leaned against an adjacent counter, idly chatting with another employee, her fingers occasionally raking through her perfectly coiffed, gleaming hair. Henrietta positioned herself subtly to the side, maintaining a discreet distance, observing them. Her presence, it seemed, went entirely unnoticed. She watched as Tyler languidly waved off an elderly couple's query about baggage, pointing dismissively to a laminated sign outlining the rules, his face still etched with that same insufferable air of disdain. A slow, familiar burn of indignation began to simmer within Henrietta, but she held it firmly in check. Her face remained a mask of placid composure, devoid of anger or lingering hurt, only a quiet, almost surgical focus. Suddenly, a resonant voice boomed over the airport's public address system. "Attention! Attention! All Pacific Airlines personnel are requested to proceed immediately to Gate B-17. Repeat, all Pacific Airlines personnel are requested to proceed to Gate B-17 without delay." Tyler and Brianna exchanged startled glances, their faces etched with a palpable bewilderment. Such urgent all-staff calls were exceedingly rare, reserved only for incidents of significant gravity. They hastily gathered their belongings, a ripple of unease passing through them, and joined the stream of other airline employees already heading towards the designated gate. Henrietta, maintaining her measured calm, followed discreetly behind, her heart beginning to pound with a quiet anticipation. She knew with an almost preternatural certainty that this was directly connected to her call to Jake. As she neared Gate B-17, a substantial gathering of approximately 20 Pacific Airlines employees had already assembled. The diverse group included pilots in their crisp uniforms, flight attendants with their meticulously styled hair, and various ground personnel, including the visibly agitated Tyler and Brianna. They stood in hushed whispers, exchanging nervous glances, desperate to ascertain the reason for this sudden, unannounced assembly. Henrietta strategically positioned herself slightly to the side, in the gentle shadow of a large pillar, ensuring she remained unobtrusive, yet afforded a clear, unobstructed view of the unfolding drama. A moment later, a figure of unmistakable authority strode purposefully into the concourse. He was tall, his presence commanding, with distinguished silver temples framing a face etched with a lifetime of experience. His eyes, though piercing, held a profound depth of wisdom. He wore an impeccably tailored, dark blue uniform, its breast adorned with a dazzling array of medals and ribbons, each a testament to a decorated career. His gait was precise, imbued with an unwavering sense of purpose, reflecting years of leading from the front. This was General Jacob Thornton, a man whose very presence radiated power and quiet strength. Behind him, two younger individuals in sharp Air Force uniforms followed, their expressions somber and respectful, along with several civilians who carried the air of high-ranking aides. As General Jake Thornton entered the hall, the hushed murmurs